The duration of the relationship between Henry II of France and Diane de Poitiers, 20 years the king senior, has long been a source of speculation. It's been wondered about and commented upon since the middle of the 16th century. Now, Diane's contemporaries found a satisfying explanation for Henri's devotion to his much older mistress in Brantome's contention that the Duchess was able to maintain her hold over the king because she remained forever beautiful. She drank an elixir of youth each day, he wrote, that preserved her alabaster complexion and golden blonde hair. I saw her at 70 years of age, he penned in the Vie de Dame Illustre, beautiful of face, as fresh and pleasant as she had been at 30 years. It is said that every morning she used some drinks made up of drinkable gold and other drugs. Now, while Brantome's claim that Diane's ageless appearance was the result of consuming an elixir of liquid gold might seem to be dubious, the team of forensic archaeologists who exhumed her remains in 2008 concluded that she had likely died from consuming exactly just such a potion. And if Diane de Poitiers' fatal case of chronic gold intoxication was exceptional, it's an expensive way to die, her quest to stay young and beautiful was hardly so. Indeed, the stakes of maintaining a youthful appearance were high during the Ancien Régime. As historians such as Catherine Lano and Chris Adams have shown, beauty was a key component of status and power, particularly for noblewomen. Women were commonly accounted well past their youth and therefore unattractive once they reached the age of 30. Drawing upon medical treatises, books of secrets, and cases from judicial and police archives, my paper today will explore Ancien Régime attitudes towards aging and how men and women alike sought to avoid both the appearance and the exigencies of old age. And this paper will argue that they did so often by seeking both medical and magical means to extend their lifespans and to restore lost youth. That might be by following physicians' advice regarding moderation in food, sex, and exercise, although that seemed too dreary a fate to many, including Montaigne, who wrote that the rewards of such a regimen were simply not worth the price. It could also be by embracing anti-aging techniques that had their roots in practices of natural magic, such as Ficino's blood therapy for rejuvenation, which was to drink the blood of a clean, healthy, temperate lad during the waxing moon. Now, the subjects of the Bourbon kings could also avail themselves of life-extending therapeutics derived from the new Paracelsan medicines, as had Diane de Poitiers. And the recipes for these began to circulate widely in the 16th century in books of secrets, as well as learned and popular medical treatises. As this paper will argue, the use of potable gold, that is drinkable gold, and other remedies that promise to stave off old age formed part of mainstream medical practice throughout the old regime. Now, from the earliest times, ambivalence about the aged existed. Certainly both positive and negative views existed. There was veneration for the wisdom and the freedom that came with age. But the negative assessments of the aged were simply scathing. As Daniel Troyansky has shown, the old were ridiculed for their bodily and their mental decline. Moliere's plays, for example, made fun of the old as foolish and decrepit and physically disgusting. They had tyrannical, selfish impulses that were only halted because they were so foolish that they could be duped. They were depicted as vain, as lecherous, as greedy, and generally loathsome to regard. As one 17th century preacher put it, old people are cowardly, negligent, slothful, frigid, coarse, defective, trembling, accompanied by sorrow and ennui. They are waiting to die. Um, so all in all, the aged were monstrous. As the sermon of the Chancellor of the University of Paris put it in 1713, consider an old man overburdened with years, his spirit dejected, his body exhausted, his face lined with wrinkles, his eyes half closed, his voice trembling, his head bent toward the earth as if seeking a sepulchre in which to throw himself. Is this not a kind of monster in nature? Now, writers were derisive about old men, as were artists, as you can see from this image from the middle of the 17th century by Abraham Boss. Writers and artists were derisive about men and even more so about old women, particularly if those old women did not conform to accepted norms of behavior and conduct. That includes women of a certain age who tried to appear younger by dyeing their hair, right, or wearing rouge and fard, or those who were sexually active. One thinks about the Rocas Carivares that greeted widows who chose to remarry, and the stereotype of sexually frustrated postmenopausal women seduced into witchcraft by crafty demons. Now, disdain for the old can be found throughout Ancien Régime society, from the bottom to the top of the social ladder, and this was certainly true in aristocratic circles. Noble society valued the young and the vigorous. For men, the physical demand of combat required and rewarded youth. The Prince de Condé was only 22 when he won the battle that would make him one of France's most renowned generals. Madame de Sevigné's cousin, Roger de Bussy-Rabutin, led a regiment into battle at the age of 16. Now, the exigencies of court life required youth from women as well. Marie Antoinette, in the 18th century, was reportedly astonished that any woman would dare to appear at court past the age of 30. In fact, youth was arguably even more critical for noble women at court, a space in which female power and status depended upon physical beauty and the manipulation of desire. That is, as scholars such as Chris Adams and Catherine Hakima have argued, it depended upon the possession of erotic capital. And for women, youth was an essential component of beauty. Diane de Poitiers is really the exception that makes the rule. As one of the participants in the Bureau d'Adresse Conference on Beauty declared, this is in the 1630s, the most essential component of beauty was youth. There were 31 particulars, by the way, to go up into the to making up beauty, but the very first of those, the most critical, is youth, which, he said, renders even the coarsest animals agreeable. So with 31 additional requirements, beauty wasn't an easy standard to meet, even for the very young. So courtiers and commoners alike therefore proved to be eager consumers of cosmetics and skin creams and other beauty products that promised to disguise or prevent the effects of aging. The cosmetic use has a history, longer than history. And in the Ancien Régime, although recipe books instructed their readers on how to prepare cosmetics at home, we see increasing demand over the course of the era that really drove an explosion in commercial cosmetic production. And we also know that that subjects of the Bourbon monarchs flocked to charlatans, to magical practitioners, magical practitioners like the infamous Lavoisin, who was the most notorious sorceress of the affair of the poisons. Clients flocked to members of the magical underworld, as well as charlatans, because they could purchase items such as perfumes that promised to render the wearer irresistible, creams intended to increase breast size, other, of course, harmful items, of course, but most frequently what they bought were unguents to whiten their complexions, powders to whiten their teeth, and dyes to cover the white in their hair. Now, early modern Europeans thought of aging as a process of stages, and that generally comprised 4 stages, but it could go up to 10. Sometimes it was 7. But the 4 stages included infancy or childhood, youth, as you can see from this engraving by Boss, part of that same series. There was the youth, right? And then there was also the age of consistence or virility. And finally, there was old age. And old age was sometimes divided into green, middle, and truly decrepit. Now you can find these stages of life represented across pre-modern Europe in images depicting the Décret des âges. This one is from the later half of the 18th century. And although there was no consensus about exactly when old age set in, some authors declared it began at 40, others at 60. As a rule of thumb, it started about 50 for both men and women. So there's no consensus about exactly when old age began, but there's certainly agreement about why it began. It was due to cooling and drying. That is, cooling and drying in the humoral sense. Now, early modern European medicine was based on a classical framework of humoral physiology that understood people's physical and mental condition to be determined by the balance of humor in their bodies. And this model provided a simple yet powerful methodology for understanding health and disease that lasted well into the 19th century. As Hippocrates had explained on the nature of man, the human body was regulated by 4 basic fluids: blood, yellow bile, black bile, and phlegm. And each of those 4 humors was associated with a primary quality: hot, dry, cold, or wet. And those corresponded in turn to one of the 4 elements that comprised all matter in the natural world. Blood, hot and wet, was associated with air. Bile, hot and dry, was connected to fire. Black bile, which is dry and cold, was coupled with earth. And phlegm, cold and wet, correlated with water. Now, in this construct, each individual had a particular complexion. Sometimes that was referred to as a temperament, which, although unique to that individual, was influenced by sex and age. So generally speaking, women were cold and moist compared to men, who were hot and dry, and the young were hotter and moister than the aged, who became colder and drier over the years. Now, physical health depended upon maintaining a suitable balance among the body's 4 humors. And the proportion of the humors, of course, that ensured good health could be affected by any number of celestial and environmental factors. This made it challenging to maintain proper humoral balance, and therefore health, and this became only more so as the body aged. Because with the passage of time, the body cooled down and it dried out. Internal vital heat diminished over time, and as the body's temperature dropped, it lost moisture. You can think about plants and leaves in the autumn, right? And wrinkles and brittle bones. So to extend life, it was understood, one had to preserve bodily moisture. And that's why ointments and creams and oils were prescribed and used, as was massage. Massage kept the vital juices moving nicely. One had to preserve bodily moisture, and one had to maintain bodily heat. As one medical expert opined, indeed, everything that lives needs heat for exercising its actions, and humidity to sustain that heat. The duration of this heat is duration of this heat in the humidity is life, which lasts as long as the one is maintained by the other, like the lighted wick in a lamp. Now, there were various medically approved means of keeping one's wick lit, some of which were more or less enjoyable than others. Shunammite probably falls into the former category, at least for the aging patient to whom it was prescribed. This is a therapy based on the Old Testament story of the young virgin, Abishag the Shunammite, who is brought to lie in the bosom of the aging King David to restore warmth to his aging body. In the 17th and 18th century, the treatment continued to be recommended by eminent physicians such as Thomas Sydenham, and it remained a medically accepted treatment through the 19th century. Now, for Christians, aging was a disease of civilization. That is, in the Old Testament, Adam and his immediate descendants, right, had lived into their 900s. I mean, Adam lived for 930 years, but by the time of Abraham, lifespan had been reduced to under 200. And early modern human beings understood that, due to their indulgent diets and their unnatural ways of life and their general sinfulness, that they were weaker, smaller, and shorter lived than the patriarchs. But even as gloomy views suggested that the contemporary decline in longevity could be reversed. Now, Descartes, for example, was thoroughly convinced that he was on the verge of discovering how to do so. He's got many letters talking about this. So when he died at the age of 54, his friends were flabbergasted. But it was during the 17th century, particularly after 1650, that old age came increasingly to be seen as a medical problem that could be solved. And that could be through balancing the humors, by maintaining vital heat, or restoring moisture to the cold and desiccated bodies of the aged. And today I want to talk about two primary techniques for accomplishing these. One that offered the means to prolong life, and the other that sought to rejuvenate the aging body. So the therapy that promised to prolong life was that Dion de Poitiers was known to consume. It was potable gold. Now, gold has a long history as a therapeutic agent. Its indestructibility suggested that it had great curative value. And we can find the use of gold in medicines linked to the alchemist's search for the quintessence, the medicine that extends life by curing all the body's ills. And one of the earliest discussions of gold's therapeutic potential comes from Pliny the Elder, who described the preparation of 8 remedies using gold and their natural properties in his natural history. And he reported that gold was good for wounds, for fistulas, for putrid ulcers, for warts, as well as warding off the ill effects of sorcery. Potable gold, though, gold that was fully dissolved in liquid and could be ingested, was not invented until the 8th century, when Jabir, the Persian alchemist, found that a combination of hydrochloric and nitric acid could be used to dissolve gold. And when Jabir's treatise on aqua regia was translated into Latin in the 13th century, it became the standard roadmap for medieval alchemists seeking to create a universal panacea. Roger Bacon, Arnaud of Villanova, Nicolas Flamel each sought to distill aurum potable, to which they accorded marvelous properties. It was marvelous because it was a cure-all. It was a universal medicine which cured all illnesses by adjusting any and all imbalances of the 4 humors. Now, the 14th century experimenta, which is attributed to Raymond Lull, but most likely written by John of Rupescissa, describes potable gold's ability to cure illnesses of 1 month in a day and those of one's duration in a month. And this was possible because, unlike all earthly things, potable gold was not imbued with the qualities of the 4 sublunar elements, and thus which were doomed to decay. Instead, potable gold was perfectly balanced, much like the 5th element which made up the heavenly spheres, and it was incorruptible. And it could confer the incorruptibility of the heavenly spheres to the human body to keep it healthy. Now, building on alchemical treatises, the Paracelsians of the 16th century also sought to find the means to distill potable gold, although not because they believed it would work by adjusting the balance of the humors. Now, in one of his treatises, Paracelsus maintained that the secret of longevity would soon be rediscovered and humans be able to live as long as the prophets of the Old Testament. He wrote, "Of all the elixirs, gold is supreme and has the most important for us. Gold can keep the body indestructible. Drinkable gold will cure all illnesses. It renews and restores." So while Paracelsianism never fully took hold in France, it attracted sufficiently influential patrons, among them Henri III, Henri IV, who employed several Paracelsian physicians. This ensured that chemical remedies gained acceptance over the course of the Ancien Régime. And it was Paracelsus and his disciples who taught that disease was ontological. That is, they believed that diseases were specific entities and that illness was not caused by the imbalance of humors in the body. They also rejected the idea that each disease required its own medicine. And they argued that if illness was not caused by the imbalance of the humors, then universal remedies and life-extending therapeutics were truly possible. Thus, Paracelsians such as Alexandre de la Troette promoted l'eau potable as a universal remedy. He reasoned that because gold is the purest of metals, it would become the most powerful of medicines. And he touted a quintessential extract of gold containing a perfect balance of salt, sulfur, and mercury that could be achieved through chemical distillation and become a cure-all. Now, recipes for potable gold circulated not only in the learned treatises of the New Chemical Medicine, but also in vernacular works intended for a popular audience. And like alchemy, this quest for the universal panacea was also pursued in less sophisticated forms, right, by various artisans, entrepreneurs, and many others looking for profits. We see it circulating in books of secrets and books of cosmetics like Guillaume's Miroir de la Beauté et Santé Corporelle, which noted that potable gold was good for fevers and varicose veins and leprosy. So by the second half of the 17th century, a variety of versions of potable gold were sold from unlicensed medical practitioners too, the folks who comprise the medical penumbra described by Lawrence Proclus and Colin Jones. Charlatans, empirics, and magical practitioners alike peddled potable gold, which is distilled according to the recipes derived from those printed in alchemical treatises and Paracelsian works. And they assured their clients that potable gold was a universal remedy that could relieve any ailments, from lethargy to rabies, simply by altering the liquid in which the gold was distilled. Now, neither books of secrets or those same medical charlatans noted that the effects of consuming it, a snowy white complexion like that of Diane de Poitiers, were caused by the mercury with which it was processed. Sorry about the drop. Now, the second means by which the subjects of the Bourbon monarchs attempted to avoid old age was similarly derived from ancient medicine and myth. As it had since antiquity, blood that was understood to have powerful properties derived from its occult virtues. And here I mean occult in the sense of hidden rather than supernatural. As Pliny had explained during the 2nd century, menstrual blood turned new wine sour. Crops touched it with it become barren. And to taste it drives dogs mad and infects their bites with poison. So menstrual blood was a standard ingredient in love potions, where the blood of a would-be lover was accorded a powerful amatory effect. But blood comprised a vital element in Ancien Régime medicine as well. It was human blood was an unremarkable ingredient in standard courses of treatment. Recommended if distilled 7 times to free it of all water for resolution of the nerves. Fresh blood was also recommended and consumed as a treatment for epilepsy. So this longstanding idea that blood could restore health and vitality, and in doing so, revitalize bodies, was perpetuated in the oft-retold myth of Medea. Now, the sorceress Medea, who had helped Jason recover the golden fleece, then restored his father Aeson's youth by draining the blood from Aeson's body, chopping him into pieces, and boiling all of his body parts in a cauldron with magical herbs, and then returning everything to his veins. And Medea's tale of rejuvenation, right, was told and retold in Ancien Régime France. Whether this was through Latin versions of Ovid's Metamorphoses, or the mythology that was translated into the vernacular, as the poet Isaac de Bensohad had done in 1676. And I have another image too that shows this. One could also watch versions of the myth of Medea performed on the stage. In fact, between 1553 and 1797, there were 19 different plays, operas, and court ballets that featured the character of Medea. Now, the rejuvenating powers attributed to blood circulated also in works of natural magic. These included Ficino's method for revitalizing the aged by having them drink the blood of a healthy and cheerful lad during the waxing moon. And they also became the basis for experiments of natural philosophers like Francis Bacon, who had speculated that revitalizing the body's juices would extend life. Once William Harvey demonstrated that the circulation of the blood at the start of the 17th century, there were multiple experiments to see if transfusing the blood of the young into the aged was a means of rejuvenation. And in France, the physician Jean-Baptiste Denis, emulating the efforts of English physicians like Richard Lauer, transfused a young dog's blood into an elderly one. This was all conducted in a well-attended public exhibition on the banks of the Seine. And what he intended to do was discover what happened, what changes transfusion produced when we will transfer the blood of a young and healthy dog into the veins of an old and mangy one. And to Denis' delight, the young and healthy dog was reported to begin capering, or sorry, the old mangy dog was reported to begin capering around shortly after the transfusion. Now, the widespread acceptance of beliefs about the restorative properties of young blood, those also may have contributed to the riots studied by Arlette Farge that broke out in Paris during the first half of the 18th century, when the Parisian police reported that periodic rumors sweeping the city were causing riots because people believed that children were being kidnapped and their blood drained so that a leprous prince, who was sometimes imagined to be Louis XV, could bathe in it. Now, as fantastical as blood cures and gold potions to cure aging seem now, their history illuminates the ways in which old age came to be seen as a medical problem that could be solved. And old age gradually became a disease to be cured rather than a state to be endured. And experimentation led to finding the means to cure it or eliminate it. Now, blood and gold continue, of course, to form part of mainstream medical practice. One can bank umbilical cord blood, right, to store the stem cells used to treat blood cancers. Gold remains part of the therapy to treat rheumatism. And of course, blood and gold continue to be advertised as vital ingredients for health and wellness, whether that's the portable gold available in health stores, such as you see here, or in the vampire facials touted to restore the skin's youthful vitality, which I believe you can still have now. Thank you.